I'm Gillian, the dramaturg for KU's production of Hookman.
And I'm Hayden, also a dramaturg for Katie's production of Hookman.
And we are coming to you live from
Recorded.
Fair. Okay. Anyway, we are here to dive into the production of Hookman. Throughout the month of October, we will be exploring themes, genres, and motifs that are connected with the play by Lauren Yee. However, these podcasts are spoiler free, so please come to see the show to see what it entails.
Come see us. Well, come see the performers. Come see our work, though,
Us too, our
obviously.
work.
Yeah. With that said, today's episode is focused on the title character, the man, the myth, the legend, Hookman. Now, Hookman's first appearance did not appear in Lauren Yee's work, but rather all across the states in different forms of media. There are cases of news clippings, folk stories, stories written down, and even
Horror movies!
But before we get out our popcorn and I heart Edward Scissorhands shirts, we are going back in time to 1946, where there are some rather unsettling events happening in Texarkana. Now, there were four violent attacks on couples in this region. Of the eight victims, five did die. Now, the first attack happened on February 22nd, 1946, around 11:45 p.m. on a Friday night. Jimmy Hollis and his girlfriend, Mary Jean Larry, parked on a secluded lover's lane just outside of Texarkana, Texas. A man in a pillowcase mask shines a flashlight into their car and physically attacks them. Both of them survived and later stated that the man was roughly 6 foot tall. Now, the second attack happened on March 24th. Richard Griffin and Polly Ann Moore were found dead in Griffin's car on Sunday morning from gunshot wounds. It is believed they were killed outside of the car and later placed there. Now, the third attack happened on April 14th. Around 1:30 a.m., Paul Martin and Betty Jo Booker left a musical performance at the VFW Club, and Martin's body was found on the side of the road, and he had been shot 4 times. Now, Betty Jo's body was actually found 2 miles away, and she had been shot twice. This attack did not happen at the Lover's Lane, which the previous two locations were at, like the other two murders. Now, the fourth and last attack was on Virgil and Katie Starks on May 3rd, and they were found in their farmhouse. Virgil was reading in his armchair when he was shot twice in the back of the head, and Katie was also shot, but she lived and managed to find a neighbor for help.
Wow, that's awful. And these murders were unresolved. But they're also not the only ones to take place in lovers' lanes across America. Other notable unsolved serial killings at lovers' lanes include the Zodiac Killer and the Monster of Florence.
Mhm. Now, when we move into the 1950s, this is where we begin to see, or rather hear, the myth known as the hook. It circulated rural America as an oral told story.
This variation of the myth is more commonly known as the hook, and it typically goes like this. A young couple is driving in a car late one night.
Potentially coming back from a date.
They pull the car over on a dark spot in the side of the road to pet or neck.
Gillian, it's not the 50s anymore. It's perfectly okay to say making out.
Okay, I just wanted to fit in the theme of the story.
Okay,
But
valid, valid, valid. Continue, continue.
anyway, then an announcement comes over the radio. The speaker warns that a dangerous criminal has escaped from the local asylum. And the one description of this man, he has a hook for a hand. Just like that. The couple, as couples do, they go back to making out, but now it's different. The girlfriend gradually becomes worried, and finally she pushes her lover away and begs him to take her home. The boyfriend is angry and frustrated, but he does reluctantly agree. And when they arrive at the girlfriend's house, the boyfriend gets out of the car. He goes to open her door to help her out, and he sees a rusty hook hanging from the side of the car. The Hookman was there all along and really only minutes away from murdering them both.
Wow. Gillian, we actually discussed this story in my creative writing class,
Ooh.
but the couple was specifically at a lover's lane. Can you think of any other alterations of the myth?
Yeah, so actually, there's this scholar, Jan Harold Brunvard, who is now a retired professor. He worked at the University of Utah, and he was also a folklorist, and he collected variations of this myth from the students in his classroom. So, for instance, a student from McPherson, Kansas, reported that the event happened 7 miles out towards Lindsborg, north on Old Highway 81, an old road called Hookman's Road. Additionally, a student from Salt Lake City stated that it happened here in Memory Grove, while another stated that the couple was parked outside Salt Lake City in a mountain canyon.
I think it's really interesting to note that the location changes where the students were from. Now, did Hookman himself evolve throughout the study?
Not throughout the study per se, but Brunford did propose that the Hook story evolved or maybe was influenced from another earlier urban legend called the boyfriend's death.
Oh, that one also starts with a young couple.
Hmm.
However, they are on their way to a party wherein their car breaks down and they hear an announcement on the radio.
Sounds familiar.
There is another escapee from the local asylum, but this time a killer. The boyfriend gets out of the car and tries to fix the engine, but it doesn't budge. With no other option, he decides to walk up the road to the local gas station and ask for help. Before he leaves, he demands that his girlfriend stays in the car and locks the door. He goes on to tell her not to unlock the door unless she hears three knocks on the window. Eventually, the girl hears knocks on the car, but they continue past three. So she stays in the car and doesn't open the door. Night goes on, the boyfriend has yet to come back, yet the knocks are still occurring. Finally, on the next day, the girl is rescued by the police, and as they take her away from the car, they tell her not to look back. Ignoring them, she looks back and turns around to see her boyfriend hanging from the tree.
So the knocks she heard all night were just his body bumping up against the car.
Yeah, he was there the whole time.
Whew.
And now, as we move forward into the 60s, we get the first publication of the original The Hook myth. Now, it appeared in an advice column called Dear Abby on November 8th, 1960. A message stated, Dear Abby, if you're interested in teenagers, you will print this story. I don't know whether it's true or not, but it doesn't matter because it served its purpose for me. A fellow and his date pulled into their favorite lover's lane to listen to the radio and do a little necking. Jillian's favorite word. The music was interrupted by an announcer who said there was an escaped convict in the area who had served time for rape and robbery. He was described as having a hook instead of a right hand. Now, the couple became frightened and drove away. When the boy took his girl home, he went around to open the car door for her. Then he saw a hook on the door handle. I don't think I will ever park to make out as long as I live. I hope this does the same for other kids. And that was submitted by Jeanette. Now, I think it's really interesting that the Lover's Lane is actually the location here in the advice column in the 60s, which
Hmm.
connects all the way back to the original murders in Texarkana in 46. Yet, iterations from the 50s do not include this detail, such as the boyfriend's death. And it's almost as if the myths of Hookman became blended with the location.
Hmm. But yet, somewhere there's also a disconnect with locations, because if we look back at Jan Harold Brunvard and the stories he collected from his classroom, they were all like very fluid and very personalized to the area where the students were from.
And you think, or I think that this kind of is like a personal element that is like necessary to storytelling. I mean, from like a writer standpoint, you can't really just craft the best story, the best like horror story, but craft the best story for your audience. Now, why would a student at KU be invested in Hookman if he's slashing his way through New York City? There
True.
needs to be like a connecting element with the story.
Yeah. Well, there is one shift that we haven't discussed yet, and it's kind of built around this idea of connecting audiences and personal narratives and characters, and it's the movies.
Oh,
So, everyone, let me introduce you to the cult classic slasher film released in 1997, I Know What You Did Last Summer. So, on a late night drive, four friends run over and assume that they kill a fisherman. And then they do the only reasonable thing, Hayden, which is they drag his body to the ocean and they never speak of the event again.
like that ever ends well for anyone.
Yeah, and it didn't. Not for them. A year later, they all get this infamous letter saying, I know what you did last summer. And then one by one, the killer is hunting them down. And what is he wielding but a hook? Spoiler, the killer was none other than the fisherman that they ran over in the beginning.
Wait, so the fisherman would have had like a meat hook for his
Mm-mm.
job. And so that's why he uses a hook because Jillian, it's not an actual like prosthetic, right?
Mm-mm.
So that's like evolution in itself. The hook is no longer the prosthetic, it is simply a murder weapon.
Sure. And there's also this separation of sorts from the hook and the man. With the hook, the fisherman is this masked killer, but without it, he just exists as this guy named Ben.
Now, does this separation ever revert back to the literature and oral stories?
It does. So Ben actually loses his arm in the last film, and then in the sequel, the hook becomes a prosthetic. And so the persona of the fisherman killer becomes stronger, and Ben's identity is then sort of further erased when at the end of the film he accidentally kills his own son.
That's crazy. Now, everyone, there are other appearances of a Hookman character in media, such as both the Candyman movies, Supernatural has an episode, and yes, SpongeBob with the hash hash slinging the hash slinging the the hash slinging slasher.
I feel like I should follow that up with Nosferatu. I won't
No,
though. I won't. Okay, so I think that's the full sort of timeline of Hookman from his possible origin story of being this serial killer to becoming an oral myth to this written warning from Jeanette and finally a pop culture symbol in the slasher film genre.
Until now, don't worry, y'all. We haven't forgotten about Lauren Yee's version. However, to avoid spoilers for the production, because we want you to come see it, we will only state that she rewrites how we view the Hookman story in a completely new perspective.
Definitely. All right, everyone. So now we're going to segue away from the evolution of our hooked foe to the deeper meanings of the urban legend. As you might have started to see and to piece together, there are threads connecting the variations together. These include moral arguments and even portrayals of disabilities, though we are going to save that topic for another time in late October, so please stay tuned.
So yeah, Jillian, why don't we like take a breather and come back and discuss those threads and like other moral arguments that we're invested in and want to talk about?
Awesome. And we are back. Let's start with the probably the most notable theme. Don't have sex.
Girl, what?
No, 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 seriously, seriously, hear me out. Okay, okay. So think about it. The murders were crimes against couples, right? And they
Yeah.
took place in areas where sexual acts could happen, like Lover's Lane. And then we get to the oral story, and it showcases this couple necking. And then they feel like they have to stop. And when they stop, they find out that they were only like moments away from being murdered.
Okay, first, can we just have a moment? Why don't we say necking anymore? Like, oh, they're just necking. Like, I think that's kind of we need to bring that back. That needs to be the next new jargon is necking.
Very cutesy, very demure.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, sorry, sidetrack, but back to Hookman. Now we cannot leave out the Dear Abby column that said, I don't think I will ever park to make out as long as I live. I hope this does the same for other kids. We could actually argue that Jeanette crafted this version of her story to spread the idea of abstinence and scare teens from wanting to go kiss.
That's a really interesting theory, and actually it would align with the sort of American societal belief from the 40s and the 60s about premarital relations.
And then eventually, when times evolve in the 70s and then to like the 90s, so does the myth. Hookman
Mhm.
becomes less of a symbol for abstinence, but more of a symbol for guilt and punishment for sin. The teens in I Know What You Did Last Summer believe they killed Ben and didn't take accountability by going to authorities and the police. They simply got rid of their problem in the body, and then that problem and that body came back to bite them in the back. Well, technically slash them in the neck,
Ugh.
but you get the point.
Yeah, and that actually brings us to another thread, which is teenage accountability. The victims are only those who make a mistake. In the variations of the oral story, the couple decide not to make out and therefore they don't die. So they're sort of redeemed from their mistake. However, in I Know What You Did Last Summer, the kids are murdered because of their connection to the original crime.
You're so right. You literally are so right with accountability. And that kind of just leads me with like one last thread that I'm a little pun intended hooked on, the weapon. Why does our antagonist always have a hook?
Mm.
What does the hook represent? The fisherman is connected to the hook because it's his occupation. He has a meat hook for his job, so he uses it as a weapon. Yet the rest of the depictions simply have him have one.
All right, bestie, hear me out here, okay? Because
I'm
this is
hearing.
a
Ears are
debate. This
on.
is a debate,
Listening on.
and I found some possible answers for what the hook could represent. All right. So Alan Dundes is another folklorist, and his answer to that question is that the hook is a phallic symbol. Yeah, I know, but he does have some reasons, so let me share those. He says it's a phallic symbol because the hook penetrates the girl's door handle. I know, and is then torn off when the car drives away, which is like a symbolic castration. But getting past some of the like oddness of that, if you think about it, and we do sort of look at that being the representation of the hook, it
Mhm.
reflects these larger anxieties in the time over dating culture, especially for young girls.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. Like the hook is the I don't even know what to say. I was like, the hook is the phallic image that you're saying
Yeah.
because it's kind of a way for parents to teach don't have sex or don't make out, don't have premarital relationships to their kids
Mhm.
without having to actually have the birds and the bees talk. It's just
Yeah.
a way how to deflect and keep their kids pure for a little longer.
Yeah. And I mean, not to get too off track here, but that's also a thing we see in like wider discussions of horror movies, right?
No,
Like,
yeah, it's like there's like seven kind of characters that would die, and like one
it's
of them.
always the girl that has sex.
Yeah,
She's
no, literally,
always the
yeah,
one that dies.
yeah, it's literally every horror movie.
Oh man, we do love ourselves some symbolism.
We do. But do you know one thing we love more than symbolism, or me personally love more than symbolism?
No, but I do think you're going to tell me.
I am going to tell you characterization.
Hmm.
Every story with a man and a hook has him being the antagonist, which I do want to state that we will discuss this later on in that podcast section that Gillian has already talked about. Um, Yet I still find it necessary to note now that Hookman is always has like this pre-existing sinister arc. I mean, in the oral stories, he was an escaped serial killer. And in I Know What You Did Last Summer, Ben was literally walking back from killing the guy who killed his daughter in a car wreck, and then he gets hit by a car. And so there's a lot of irony in that. But he is pretty consistent. I mean, he's a rather static character if you view it. I mean, once a killer, always a killer. Now, Jillian, how would you like interpret that choice? Because I have a few ideas myself.
Yeah, I that's a really good question. And I wonder if this sort of stasis of this character is tied to, those like long, lengthy discussions on nature versus nurture.
Hmm.
And I'm wondering if, Ben and I Know What You Did Last Summer, or maybe even like other existences of this Hookman, is he's always evil because evil is in his nature.
Hmm.
Like it is a part of him, and therefore it's irredeemable, and he's evil, and so he's always going to be perpetuating these evil acts. It's almost this like self-fulfilling prophecy in a way. Because his nature is to be evil, he will be evil. I don't know.
And I guess that like that makes a lot of sense because if you do think of like why is he the one that's static and why do these like the kids kind of get to have their arcs and like their growth or their deaths?
Mm.
It's really because I mean, horror stories and even like just like folk tales are kind of warnings from like parents to
Mhm.
kids or just elder generations of kids. And I mean, if Hookman is at all redeemable, people are going to latch more into a sympathetic manner to him than to
Mm.
the kids. And then kids who are like going to go make out or neck, like your favorite word, um, they won't really have that fear of Hookman. They'll just be like, oh, yeah, there's this guy. He's kind of chilling in the woods. But it's more of that here's this monster, if you
Right.
will, like this evil entity. He's like the fisherman. He's separated from Ben. It's just this figure without a lot of this characterization to him. So that's why he's kind of static.
Sure. And that evilness is what makes the moral a good moral.
Yeah.
Because you're not going to scare kids into behaving if there's
Mhm.
not some sort of consequence.
And back to them being kids, it's like Hookman and Ben, like these are older characters, and so they're kind of set in their own ways.
Mm.
And these kids, they're the ones that they can change their own narrative. They're young, they're malleable, whereas
Yeah.
Hookman is that old static character, so he doesn't conflict with their evolution.
Yeah. And I'm also thinking, like, if we go back to the original myth, the kids, the boyfriend and girlfriend in the car, they are literally like a step away from making the worst mistake of their lives, which
Mhm.
is have sex. And you can have a whole conversation about what that means. But in terms of the story, like they're allowed to have this cushion between crossing that line, right? Like
Mhm.
they're just stopped from making that mistake.
They're
So
aware, they're aware.
and they are redeemable. They can come back into society and be good, law abiding citizens, good kids. But Hookman is just always evil. He's
He's
just
an
there to be
outsider.
evil. His purpose is there to be evil.
Mhm.
Yeah. We could probably continue to talk about this for like the next 10 years of our lives.
I know, and I'm actually kind of glad we're having this discussion because this is bringing a lot out for me, and I hope it's bringing a lot out to our audience.
Yeah, I hope so too. Though, in order to make this like a relatively digestible podcast for everyone,
Mhm.
let's sort of close it up here. So, I think that's it. I think, overall, we saw the Hookman as this fluid character, and he's used to represent a lot: abstinence, guilt, punishment. And I hope learning a little bit about the Hookman got you all really excited about coming to see this production. Thank you all so much for tuning in and for hanging out with me and Hayden as we talked through the Hookman myth.
Thank you everyone for joining us, and then we will be here again. We have two more episodes coming up, but our next one, we are taking a step away from Hookman and into the light of queerness and horror. I'm
Woo!
Hayden,
I'm Gillian,
and
and
we're
we're
hooked.
hooked. Bye.
Bye.